Chapter 1: The Crimson Room. The air in the Crimson Room was thick with the scent of roses and something darker, metallic, like blood. Scarlet velvet draped the walls, and hundreds of candles flickered in elaborate iron holders, their flames dancing as though alive. The center of the room stood a massive canopy bed, its silk sheets the color of fresh wounds, and atop it lay a woman with skin so pale it nearly glowed. Her black lace dress clung to her curves as she turned her gaze toward the door, her lips painted in a cruel, sensual smile that sent a shiver down the spine. Ethan had not planned to enter this place. The invitation arrived under his door without a sender, sealed with black wax and scented faintly of something sweet and rotting. But once he read the words, "Come to me at midnight. I know what you desire, !" He found himself powerless to resist. Now, standing just beyond the threshold, his breath came shallow and quick as his eyes locked on hers. The woman on the bed beckoned him forward with a single, languid finger. He felt the temperature drop as he stepped inside, the door closing silently behind him. The candles flared and dimmed, casting long shadows that moved too deliberately to be mere tricks of the light. Her laugh was low and soft, but it vibrated through him, warm and cold all at once. "You've come," she whispered, and her voice was like velvet over a blade. "Do you even know what it is you crave?" Ethan tried to speak, but the words dissolved on his tongue. His body answered before his mind could, carrying him closer to her until he stood at the foot of the bed. From here, he could see her eyes gleaming in the candlelight, blacker than night and yet somehow ablaze with hunger. Closer he got, the more he could feel it, a magnetic pull in his chest and something else lower, primal, impossible to deny. With deliberate grace, she rose from the bed, the lace slipping from her shoulders to reveal skin marred with faint crimson scars that traced strange, indecipherable symbols. He could not tell if they were wounds or tattoos, but they glowed faintly, pulsing like a heartbeat. She reached up and cupped his cheek, her fingers cold enough to burn. "You want to touch me," she murmured. "But you should know, everything here has its price." Her other hand slid down his arm, nails sharp enough to draw a thin line of blood without him noticing until he felt the heat. When she pressed her lips to his ear, he could feel her breath, sweet, intoxicating, and laced with decay. "Do you consent?" she asked. "Say it." Her tongue traced the curve of his neck, sending sparks of fear and desire down his spine. "Yes," he breathed, though he wasn't sure whether he spoke it or merely thought it. Her smile widened into something feral and beautiful as she leaned back to study him. Then she took his hand and guided it to her waist, where her flesh felt impossibly smooth and cold, like marble yet alive. Beneath his fingertips, he felt the faint thrum of something moving inside her. The candles flared again, and the walls seemed to ripple, the velvet shifting to reveal glimpses of something behind them. Dark shapes writhing, clawed hands pressing through the fabric as though eager to escape. Ethan's knees nearly gave out as the sensation of being watched intensified, 1,000 unseen eyes devouring the scene. She leaned closer, her lips almost brushing his as she whispered, "Once you begin, you can't go back." With that, she pushed him gently onto the bed, and the silk seemed to come alive beneath him, winding around his wrists and ankles to hold him there. Her body hovered over his, her hair falling in a dark curtain around his face as she climbed atop him. In that moment, the air became suffocatingly thick with heat and the coppery scent of blood, the candles burning higher and higher, casting grotesque shadows on the ceiling. Her smile was the last thing he saw before the room fell into darkness, wide, glistening, and filled with a hunger that was no longer human. "Welcome," she breathed, and the shadows behind the velvet began to move closer, whispering his name over and over. And then, something sharp slid beneath his skin and everything went black. Chapter 2: The Hunger Behind the Velvet. Ethan woke in silence, though he was certain he hadn't truly slept. Crimson Room still surrounded him, but it had changed. The candles burned lower, their flames sickly blue, and the scent of roses had soured into something acrid and wet. His wrists and ankles were still bound to the bed by the living silk, which now pulsed faintly as though feeding from his skin. A dull ache throbbed in his veins, and when he looked down, he saw faint red lines spiderwebbing up his arms like vines. Above him, the woman stood motionless, her head tilted at an unnatural angle as she watched him. Her lips glistened with crimson, though he hadn't felt any pain yet, and her eyes were no longer black. They glowed faintly, reflecting something ancient and alien. "You taste alive," she murmured, her voice now carrying a hollow echo. "Alive is my favorite." He struggled against the silk, but the more he fought, the tighter it held, weaving higher along his thighs and chest. Shadows thickened in the corners of the room, and faint whispers grew louder, words he could not understand yet that filled him with terror. From behind the velvet walls, shapes pressed through. Hands, faces, bodies writhing just beyond reach, their hunger palpable in the air. She climbed onto the bed again, straddling him with her knees, pinning him to the sheets. This time, her skin felt warmer, as though the room's chill drained into him and left her blazing with heat. Her nails traced his jawline, leaving faint, smoking lines where they touched. "You said yes," she reminded him, her grin sharp. "And now you belong to me, to us." Her hair fell forward, brushing his cheeks like cold silk as she bent down and pressed her lips to his chest. First, the sensation was blissful, a rush of warmth and pleasure so intense he almost sobbed. But then came the bite. Her teeth, impossibly sharp, sank into his skin, and a burst of white-hot pain seared through him, accompanied by the sound of tearing flesh and something deeper, like his soul being unstitched. From the velvet walls, the whispers turned to moans, a chorus of voices urging her on. The shadows pushed closer, their clawed hands gripping the edges of the curtains, eyes gleaming between the folds. One by one, their faces became clearer, pale, beautiful, and monstrous, mouths smeared with blood, all watching him with hungry anticipation. She leaned back, her lips redder than ever, and licked her fingers clean. "Delicious," she hissed, and her tongue flicked along his wound, sealing it in an instant. But he could feel it inside him now, something crawling, coiling beneath his skin, as though her venom had planted seeds in his veins. Panic and desire warred within him, and he gasped as the silk shifted again, now covering his mouth. "You won't scream," she said, her tone almost tender. "Screaming excites them, and then they'll want their turn." Her eyes darted to the velvet walls, and Ethan saw dozens of shapes writhing with increased fervor, their whispers rising to a fever pitch. The air grew heavier, the ceiling seeming to close in, the candlelight flickering so violently it stung his eyes. Her hand slid lower down his chest, fingers digging into his skin as she whispered something in a language he couldn't comprehend. The symbols carved into her own body began to glow brighter, and he felt his own blood answering, veins burning as if set alight. The shadows pressed closer still, and for the first time, he saw their mouths moving in unison, whispering his name over and over. And then she stopped abruptly, her face inches from his. Her grin faded into something darker, her eyes narrowing as she studied him. "You are different," she murmured, almost to herself. The voices fell silent, the shadows froze, and the velvet rippled as if recoiling. She leaned in, her breath hot and metallic against his ear. "Perhaps you'll survive the hunger." Her smile returned, wide and glistening, as she added, "But we'll see soon enough." Chapter 3: The Feast of Shadows. The silence that followed her last words was deafening, thick with the scent of copper and roses. Ethan's pulse thundered in his ears as she drew back, her glowing eyes fixed on him with a strange curiosity. Around them, the velvet walls quivered, as if the shapes behind them were holding their breath. The silk that bound his wrists slackened slightly, just enough to let him feel the ache in his joints and the raw heat where her bite still burned on his chest. She rose gracefully from the bed, her black lace dress now torn in places, revealing more of those strange, glowing symbols etched into her flesh. With a flick of her fingers, the candles roared back to life, casting jagged shadows that danced across the walls. "They're impatient," she whispered without looking at him. "But I will decide when the feast begins." Finn's throat felt raw beneath the silk gag, his breath coming in shallow gasps. The shadows pressed closer, their forms more distinct now, twisted, beautiful figures of both man and beast, their clawed hands raking against the velvet as they watched. One of them pressed its face so close to the curtain that its features became clear, eyes like molten gold, teeth too long for its mouth, and a tongue that flicked out hungrily before retreating. The woman circled the bed, her movements slow and deliberate, her long nails trailing along the silk sheets. "You feel it, don't you?" she asked, her voice low and taunting. "What I've put inside you is waking now. It knows what it must become." At her words, the red lines on his arms brightened and twisted, crawling further up his skin like veins of fire. Without warning, she snapped her fingers and the silk gag vanished, leaving his lips free. He coughed, the air tasting of ash and iron. What are you?" he managed to rasp, his voice hoarse and unsteady. Her smile widened, and she leaned close enough that her breath kissed his cheek. "I am what you begged for," she said simply. "And they," she gestured to the shadows, "are what you fear." The velvet walls began to split at the seams, long black claws tearing through as the creatures pushed their way into the room. The air became suffocating, heavy with the sound of their whispers and the sharp scent of blood. Ethan's body tensed as the nearest figure stepped fully into the candlelight. Its skin was a patchwork of pale flesh and glistening black scales, its eyes locked on him with predatory hunger. The woman climbed onto the bed again, her knees on either side of his hips, and the shadows froze at her command. She tilted her head, studying him like a prized possession. "If you survive the night," she murmured, her lips grazing his ear, "you may even come to crave this." Creatures hissed softly in the background, as if amused by her words. She reached down, pressing her palm against his chest where the bite had been, and he felt a surge of heat that burned and thrilled all at once. The symbols on her body flared so bright they illuminated the room, casting the creatures in stark relief, grotesque yet strangely beautiful, their forms writhing in anticipation. Her own flesh seemed to shimmer, the lines between woman and nightmare blurring. The velvet walls fell away completely, revealing a vast, black expanse beyond, a void teeming with thousands of those creatures, all watching, waiting. The room seemed to float in the darkness, the bed the only solid ground. The woman's grin grew impossibly wide, her teeth sharp and glinting. "Now," she breathed, her voice a command that made the shadows shudder. "The feast begins." Creatures surged forward, their whispers rising into a deafening roar as the first of them reached the edge of the bed, claws sinking into the sheets. Ethan's breath caught as the woman leaned back, her eyes gleaming with triumph. "Show them," she whispered, "what you're becoming." And then the darkness swallowed everything but her eyes, burning like stars in the void, watching him with hungry delight. Chapter 4: The Awakening Hunger. When the darkness lifted, Ethan was no longer on the bed. He stood barefoot on a cold, slick surface, his wrists still bound by faint traces of silk that pulsed weakly like dying veins. The void stretched infinitely in all directions, filled with faint whispers and thousands of burning eyes. The creatures encircled him now, yet kept their distance, as though waiting for a signal. The woman stood before him, her hair wild, her lace dress now nothing but tatters clinging to her luminous skin. "Do you feel it yet?" she asked, her voice echoing in the endless black. He opened his mouth, but no sound came. His chest burned where her bite had been, and he clutched at it instinctively, feeling something alive writhing beneath his ribs. Creatures hissed in unison, their golden eyes narrowing, their long claws scraping against the unseen ground. The woman stepped closer, her presence dominating the space, her fingers trailing down his arm until they reached his hand. "You're changing," she said softly. "And they can smell it." Creatures began to circle faster, their whispers growing louder, more urgent. Faces appeared in the dark, some familiar, some monstrous, mocking him with silent laughter. He stumbled, the silk around his ankles snapping away as if recognizing his weakness. He fell to his knees, gasping, as the red veins on his arms blazed brighter, crawling up to his throat and blooming across his chest like a sinister flower. She crouched before him, her eyes glimmering with something between lust and hunger. "Fight it if you wish," she said with a smirk, her nails grazing his cheek. "But it's already inside you. It was always inside you. I just woke it up." Her lips hovered over his, and for a fleeting moment he thought she might kiss him. Instead, she breathed into his mouth, a searing heat that filled his lungs and made his vision flash white. Suddenly, his senses sharpened. He could hear every heartbeat of the creatures, smell the coppery sweetness of their skin, feel the weight of their stares pressing against him. Pain in his chest transformed into something else, power, raw and electric, coursing through his veins. The creatures halted their circling, and one of them, a towering figure with black wings, stepped forward bearing its fangs. Bowed its head low before him, as though in recognition. The woman laughed, the sound rich and dark, echoing off the invisible walls of the void. "Ah," she purred, "there it is. My beautiful monster." She rose to her feet, her gaze never leaving his. Creatures began to kneel one by one, their whispers replaced by a deafening silence, save for the crackle of energy in the air. Ethan staggered upright, the last threads of silk falling away. His skin glowed faintly now, the red veins burning like molten metal. His heartbeat no longer felt entirely his own. It matched the rhythm of the whispers of the creatures, of the void itself. He looked at his hands, at the faint black claws forming at his fingertips, and shuddered. The woman circled him again, her hair brushing against his bare shoulder as she leaned close. "Now you see," she murmured, her breath hot against his ear. "You were never prey. You were always meant to be one of us." Her nails traced the bite mark on his chest, now fully healed and shaped into a perfect sigil that pulsed with dark light. The void began to hum, a low vibration that rattled his bones. Creatures rose in unison, their eyes fixed on him, their claws ready. The woman stepped back, her hands raised as though presenting him to them. "Feed," she commanded, her voice shaking the air. "Show them your hunger." Ethan's body moved before his mind could catch up. His new claws flexed, his lips curling back into a snarl he didn't recognize as his own. The creatures surged forward, not to attack but to offer themselves, their necks bared, their eyes gleaming with expectation. And in the pit of his stomach he felt it, the hunger awakening fully, sharp and endless, as his vision darkened and the first scream tore from his throat, swallowed by the shadows waiting to feast with him. Chapter 5: The Throne of Hunger. When the scream faded into silence, Ethan stood amidst the aftermath of his first feeding. The void was littered with the faint outlines of fallen creatures, their bodies dissolving into smoke and shadow, returning to the dark from which they came. His chest heaved, his hands slick with black ichor that still steamed faintly. Around him, the remaining creatures bowed low, whispering his name as though it were a prayer. Above them all, the woman watched, her smile sharp and triumphant. The red veins across Ethan's skin flared with a fierce light, and the sigil on his chest glowed as though alive, pulsing in time with the throbbing silence of the void. The woman approached, her bare feet silent on the slick floor, and her fingers slid beneath his chin to lift his face. "You did well," she murmured, her voice like honey over knives. "Your hunger suits you." Ethan's breath came heavy, his eyes now a deep crimson that reflected the infernal glow of the void. He tried to speak, but the language of his old self felt foreign. Instead, a low, guttural growl escaped his lips, and the creatures answered it with a unified hiss of devotion. The woman nodded approvingly, her hands gliding down his arms to smear the ichor on her own skin like ritual paint. The void began to shift and ripple, the floor rising beneath Ethan's feet until a dark throne emerged from the depths, a jagged, living thing of shadow and bone. Creatures retreated in reverence as he was guided to it, their bodies folding into the darkness like smoke. The woman placed a hand on his shoulder, her nails digging gently into his flesh as she whispered, "Sit, my king. Your reign begins tonight." As he lowered himself onto the throne, the silk of his bindings reappeared, but this time they wove into his arms like regal adornments, curling around his biceps and wrists in intricate patterns. The throne pulsed under him, alive and waiting, its surface shifting to match his form. From the distance, new shapes began to emerge, creatures larger, more monstrous than before, each bearing offerings of flesh and bone. The woman knelt before him now, her hair spilling over her shoulders as she bared her throat in submission. "They are yours to command," she said, her voice breathless, her eyes never leaving his. "Your hunger shapes this world. Feed it and they will follow. Deny it, she smirked faintly, and it will devour you from within. Ethan raised a hand, testing the weight of his new authority. The nearest creature, a winged beast with obsidian scales, crawled forward on all fours and pressed its forehead to the floor before him. Without thinking, he reached out and touched its crown, feeling a rush of heat and power flow into his fingertips. Creature moaned in pleasure or pain as it disintegrated into shadow, absorbed into his being. The void around him shifted again, the darkness now alive with countless whispers all chanting in perfect unison. The air thickened, the oppressive heat of it pressing down like a storm. The woman rose gracefully, her body now glowing faintly as the symbols on her skin blazed to life. "You are no longer Ethan," she said. "You are what we made you. What you always were." He opened his mouth, and this time words came, not in his old tongue, but in the language of the void, dark and resonant, shaking the creatures to their cores. The throne beneath him seemed to approve, its jagged edges curling upward like claws cradling him in place. Creatures howled in response, their devotion filling the void with a symphony of madness. As the woman climbed the steps to stand beside him, she leaned down, her lips grazing his ear once more. "The hunger never ends," she whispered. "And neither will you." With that, the darkness thickened into something tangible, wrapping around them both, as the void sang his name and the throne pulsed with life beneath him, awaiting his next command. Chapter 6: The Coronation of Shadows. The void roared with a soundless force, a chorus of whispers and screams blending into one as Ethan sat upon the throne. The darkness tightened around him like a second skin, and the creatures beyond the circle rose, their bodies writhing and reshaping as though in preparation for something monumental. The woman stood at his side, her eyes gleaming with wicked pride. "Tonight you are crowned," she announced, her voice carrying above the cacophony. Creatures moved closer, their forms shifting into grotesque parodies of human and beast. One by one, they prostrated themselves before the throne, spilling blood and bone as offerings onto the black floor. Ethan's claws twitched involuntarily, a hunger building in his chest so sharp it made his breath hitch. The sigil on his skin blazed like a brand, illuminating the vast dark in a cruel red light. The woman extended her hands to him, and from the void rose a crown, not of gold but of bone and shadow, studded with faintly glowing eyes. It floated before him, the air around it trembling with malevolence. She smiled faintly and whispered, "Claim it." Her words sent a shockwave through the air, and the creatures howled in approval, the sound rattling his teeth. Ethan lifted a hand, hesitant but unable to resist. As his fingers closed around the crown, a jolt of cold fire seared through him, burning away the last vestiges of who he had been. The whispers grew deafening, chanting his name, though it no longer sounded like Ethan. The woman stepped closer, her lips nearly brushing his as she said, "You belong to the hunger now." "Wear it." Crown settled upon his head, impossibly heavy yet somehow part of him. Creatures bowed lower still, their bodies pressed into the black floor, their whispers turning into a rhythmic chant. His throne shivered beneath him, the jagged bones curling higher around his frame like claws embracing him fully. The hunger in his chest became unbearable until he let it loose with a roar that shook the void itself. The woman climbed onto the arm of his throne, draping herself lazily over him as though he were already her king. "See how they worship you," she murmured, her nails grazing his neck. "You are the shadow, the feast, the void made flesh. Every breath you take feeds the hunger. Every thought you think bends them closer to your will." Her tongue flicked over his jaw, and he felt his body respond with terrifying certainty. Creatures began tearing into one another at the base of the throne, their blood and essence spilling across the floor and crawling toward him in dark rivers. The throne drank it eagerly, and he could feel the power rush up into him, making his veins burn and his vision blur. The woman moaned softly as she watched, her eyes full of satisfaction. "Yes," she said, "take it all." The void above them split open, revealing an endless sky of red lightning and writhing shapes that defied comprehension. Creatures below began climbing the steps toward him, not to challenge him, but to offer themselves, merging into the throne, into him, into the darkness that now answered only to his hunger. His fingers tightened around the arms of the throne as he accepted them, one by one. The air grew hotter, the oppressive heat now alive with the pulse of his power. The whispers became words, commands he didn't fully understand, yet instinctively obeyed. His body glowed faintly, his skin now a tapestry of sigils and veins, every line of him a map of the void. The woman leaned into him, her breath hot against his ear. "My king," she whispered, her voice reverent. As the last creature dissolved into him, the throne rose higher, lifting him above the void. Creatures below howled in ecstasy, and the woman pressed her lips to his throat, her teeth grazing skin that no longer felt entirely human. "Rule," she whispered, "and never wake." The void thundered in agreement as he closed his eyes, letting the hunger crown him completely, the darkness folding around him like a lover's embrace. Chapter 7: The Banquet of Flesh. The darkness swelled and then cracked like ice, revealing a vast new chamber suspended in the void. Ethan's throne settled upon a circular dais of bone and black marble, encircled by pillars carved with writhing figures frozen in agony and ecstasy. Creatures gathered below, their golden eyes gleaming with hunger and devotion as they awaited his next command. The woman stood at his side, her body shimmering faintly, her lips curled in a knowing smile. "Your banquet awaits," she purred. The air thickened with the scent of blood and roses as massive gates opened on the far side of the chamber, and through them came a procession of figures, human-shaped but pale and trembling, their eyes glazed as though sleepwalking. Their bare feet left faint trails of crimson on the floor, and yet none dared to speak. Ethan's claws flexed over the arms of the throne, his hunger roaring inside him at the sight of them. Creatures parted to allow the procession forward, and the humans collapsed to their knees at the base of the dais. Their necks bared, they stared upward with an eerie mix of fear and longing. The woman descended the steps gracefully, her fingers brushing their skin as she passed. Wherever she touched, they quivered, their breath catching as if on the brink of both terror and release. "All of this," she said softly, glancing back at him, "is yours." Ethan rose from the throne, the air around him crackling with his power. Creatures hissed in approval, their claws scraping the marble as they chanted his name. His feet carried him down the steps before he even realized he'd moved. The humans shivered in unison, their scent intoxicating, a heady mix of fear, lust, and surrender. He could hear their heartbeats like a symphony of drums. He stopped before the first of them, a young woman with golden hair matted to her cheeks, her lips parted in silent offering. His claw grazed her neck, drawing a thin line of blood. Her breath hitched, her body arching toward him as though inviting the inevitable. The woman watched from the shadows, her eyes glinting with approval, her body lit faintly by the sigils that now burned along Ethan's skin. He sank his claws into the girl's shoulders and drew her close. His fangs, he realized now he had them, slid effortlessly into her throat. Heat and power surged through him as her blood filled him, the taste richer and more electric than anything before. Creatures howled, their voices blending with her gasp of ecstasy as the void itself seemed to shudder around them. When he released her, she crumpled to the ground, her eyes glassy, a faint smile still on her lips. The others crawled forward eagerly, clawing at his feet, whispering his name like a prayer. One by one they came to him, each surrendering themselves to his hunger, each leaving him stronger and more attuned to the endless rhythm of the void. The throne pulsed faintly behind him, as though alive, feeding on the feast as much as he. The woman approached him as the last of the humans lay spent and silent on the floor, their bodies dissipating into ash that scattered into the void. She pressed her body against his, her lips grazing his jaw. "Do you see now?" she whispered, her breath hot and sweet. "This is what you were born for. To consume. To reign. To never stop." His hands slid around her waist of their own accord, his claws grazing her skin but drawing no blood. He could feel her heartbeat sync with his, the hunger inside him answering hers, as if they were two halves of the same nightmare. "Take me," she murmured, her eyes dark and blazing all at once. "Claim what is already yours." As their lips met, the void erupted in light and sound, the creatures screaming their devotion, the shadows dancing like fire around them. In that moment, he felt everything, every heartbeat, every whisper, every ounce of hunger in the endless dark, all flowing into him, crowning him again and again as the void embraced him and the banquet of flesh began anew. Chapter 8: The Veil of Desire. The void shimmered, and the light from their kiss bled into the darkness, fracturing it into 1,000 streaks of red and gold. Ethan felt himself lifted above the dais, suspended in the air as the creatures below moaned and writhed, their worship becoming a physical force that pressed against his skin. The woman clung to him, her body entwined with his, her nails digging into his back as the hunger within him reached a fever pitch. Below them, the chamber began to change. The black marble cracked and bled rivers of molten shadow, the pillars bending and twisting into grotesque shapes that leered at him with hollow eyes. The air turned thick, heavy with heat and the smell of scorched roses. The creatures hissed, their devotion shifting into something more primal, desire laced with fear, as they crawled closer to the dais. The woman's lips broke from his just long enough for her to whisper, "They're yours. All of them. You can take everything now." No veil, no restraint. Her breath was hot and sticky with blood as her hands slid down his chest, tracing the pulsing sigil at his heart. "Show them your true form." As if in answer, his body arched and shuddered. The red veins along his arms and chest flared, bursting into tendrils of black fire that coiled outward like grasping hands. His eyes blazed brighter than the lightning in the void, and his skin split in places, revealing the darkness beneath. Creatures cried out in unison, prostrating themselves as the hunger erupted from him in waves. The humans, or what remained of them, rose from the ash, their forms more beautiful and monstrous than before. They floated toward him, their mouths open in silent invitation, their bodies shimmering with the same strange glow that now covered his own. He reached for them, and the hunger obeyed, consuming them not with teeth but with shadow, drawing them into him until he could feel them burning inside his veins. The woman wrapped herself around him from behind, her lips at his ear, her voice trembling with pleasure. "You are the veil and the darkness now. The god they feared and the lover they begged for." Her hands pressed against his chest, and he felt the sigil blaze hotter, until its light filled the chamber like a second sun. There is nothing left to deny. Creatures began to rise, their shapes elongating, their claws growing sharper, their golden eyes fixed on him with both reverence and lust. The throne behind them crumbled into dust, replaced by a great altar of black glass that reflected his twisted silhouette. The humans knelt along its edge, their bodies slick with blood and shadow, offering themselves again and again as the void roared its approval. Ethan stepped down from the air, his feet striking the altar with a sound that silenced even the whispers. The woman stood before him now, her own body aflame with the same black fire that coursed through him. She bowed deeply, her hair sweeping the cracked marble as she murmured, "Your hunger has no equal now. Take me, my king. Take everything." He reached for her, and when their fingers met, the chamber exploded in heat and light. The creatures howled, the humans cried out, and the shadows peeled back, revealing an even deeper void beyond, a place of endless stars and endless hunger. He pulled her close, their forms merging in a dance of claws, fangs, and shadow as the void swallowed them both. Above them, the stars themselves seemed to weep as the hunger consumed everything, leaving only whispers and the faint glow of the sigil where Ethan and the woman had stood, now indistinguishable from the dark that crowned them. And somewhere in the endless black, a new heartbeat began to echo, louder and more demanding than all the rest. Chapter 9: The Heartbeat Below. The echoing heartbeat grew louder, reverberating through the vast void like thunder beneath the skin. Ethan opened his eyes, or what they had become, and found himself standing on an obsidian plain. The altar and the creatures were gone, replaced by a silent sea of black, lit only by the faint glow of the sigil embedded in his chest. The woman was there too, though her form flickered, her body now little more than shadow and fire. The air here was colder, sharper, filled with something ancient and watchful. Each beat of the unseen heart sent tremors through the ground, raising jagged shards of black crystal that glowed faintly red. Ethan felt them resonate with his own hunger, answering it like a dark choir. The woman drifted closer, her hair floating around her as though underwater. "You've woken it," she murmured, her voice hollow and heavy. "Now it wakes you." Beneath the plane, shapes began to writhe. Huge, coiling forms pressed against the surface, cracking it with their weight. One great eye blinked open in the dark below, its pupil a slit of endless red light. Ethan staggered as the hunger inside him roared in recognition, aching to join with the thing below. "What is it?" he asked, his voice now a growl more than words. The woman smiled faintly, though her shadowy face could no longer hold human expression. "The first hunger," she said. "The one we all came from. The one even I dared not wake." She reached out and placed her hand on his chest over the pulsing sigil. "But you already belonged to it. You always did." The black plane began to fracture under their feet, vast cracks spreading outward as the shapes below grew more restless. A sound like 1,000 claws scratching on stone filled the air, making the woman's form ripple. The great eye blinked again, and this time Ethan couldn't look away. He felt himself pulled downward, the surface breaking apart to swallow him whole. He fell through the void, the darkness rushing past him in streaks of red and gold. Around him, the remnants of creatures he had consumed clung to him like ghosts, their whispers rising in a chorus. *devour. Be devoured. Become *. The woman's voice cut through them all, soft yet piercing. The crown is only the beginning. Now comes the throne below. He landed in a cavern so vast it swallowed the horizon. Its walls pulsed with veins of molten shadow, and at its center lay a monstrous heart, suspended by tendrils of black fire. Beat slowly but with enough force to rattle the ground, each throb spraying the air with a fine mist of blood and ash. Ethan's own chest ached in rhythm, his sigil burning brighter than ever. The woman appeared beside him, her body nearly fully dissolved into the darkness now. "Kneel," she whispered, her voice cracked and distant. "You cannot stand before it until you give everything. Even yourself." Ethan's legs buckled before he could resist, and he sank to the ground, his claws digging into the stone as the hunger within him screamed to be let free. The heart began to lower itself toward him, its tendrils stretching out like fingers. One coiled gently around his neck, another traced his jaw. The whispers rose to a deafening roar, his own name lost within them. The woman leaned close one final time, her form collapsing into ash as she murmured, "You are the hunger now!" "And it is you." As the heart pressed against his chest, the sigil flared and then shattered, the shards dissolving into the air. His body arched back, his veins filling with black fire as the tendrils wrapped around him completely. Cavern went white, the void itself screaming, as Ethan's roar merged with the heartbeat of the thing below, and the world broke open to make room for what he was becoming. Chapter 10: The Last Embrace. When the light faded, Ethan stood no longer as a man but as a silhouette of shadow and fire, crowned in darkness and crowned in hunger. Cavern around him quivered, its walls shuddering as if in pain, the monstrous heart now fused to his chest, its tendrils vanishing beneath his skin. Above him, the void split open in a silent scream, revealing an endless expanse of stars that pulsed in time with his own heartbeat. The ground beneath his feet melted into a mirror of black glass, and in its surface he saw himself fully for the first time. No flesh remained, only a lattice of sigils and veins of fire, his eyes twin pits of molten red, his hands more claw than finger. Creatures of the void gathered in silence, their bodies pressed into the ground as they dared not look directly at him. The woman's ashes still floated in the air, shimmering faintly as though whispering farewell. Ethan's hunger throbbed louder than thought, a ceaseless rhythm that devoured everything it touched. His mind flickered with memories of what he had been, but they dissolved under the weight of what he had become. The first hunger, the throne below, the crown and the banquet, it had all led here. The whispers now spoke clearly in his ears. There is no end. Only the feast *. A new presence stirred in the dark. a figure older and larger than the cavern itself. From the shadows emerged a shape like a god, its many arms wreathed in black flame, its eyes scattered across its body like stars. It bowed before him, the closest thing to reverence the void could offer. Its voice shook the air, deep and terrible. "We have waited, and you have come. Take your place." Ethan stepped forward without hesitation. With each stride, the ground split, spilling rivers of shadow into the void. Creatures lifted their heads at last, their golden eyes wide with awe and terror. The center of the mirrored plain rose a massive throne of bone and starlight, its back so high it disappeared into the dark above. The figure of the god receded, leaving only the whisper, "Sit, and all will be yours." He climbed the steps slowly, the hunger inside him growing calmer, more focused, no longer a scream but a steady roar. At the top, he turned to face the void one final time. The woman's ashes gathered faintly at the base of the throne, swirling into a faint, feminine silhouette. Her voice, barely audible, rose from the air. "You've devoured even me, my king." Ethan sat, and the throne embraced him fully, its jagged arms curling around his body like a lover's hold. The sigils on his skin flared brighter, and the entire void seemed to bow in submission. The stars blinked out one by one, replaced by the glow of his eyes, until the only light left was his own. Creatures began to rise and chant, their bodies writhing with a feverish devotion as they pressed themselves against the glass plane, their whispers becoming a single voice. Asterisk, "We are yours. Feed us. Let us. End us." Asterisk, his claws drummed lightly on the throne's armrest, and he felt their words seep into his bones. The godlike figure appeared once more in the distance, its massive form folding into nothingness as it too surrendered to him. Ethan leaned back in his throne, the hunger finally quiet, though never gone. A faint smile curved across what remained of his mouth as the woman's voice murmured once more, this time from within his chest, "Rule forever." And so he did. The void screamed, the stars wept, the creatures writhed, and the last of Ethan, the man, vanished into the endless hunger, leaving only the king of shadows and desire to reign over the broken world. And in the silence that followed, the heartbeat of the void echoed on, steady and eternal, as his throne pulsed with life beneath him.